Unlike me, who had always believed that security came from staying close to the people you loved, Leo seemed determined to build a life entirely on his own terms. After spending 2 years in college, he finally admitted that he couldn't see himself continuing down that road. It wasn't because he was incapable of succeeding. He simply couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's idea of what his future should look like. Our family had never struggled to provide for him, and I reminded him of that more than once. But Leo hated the thought of relying on us. He wanted to earn his own money, make his own decisions, and know that whatever he had in life came from his own effort. So he found work at a grocery store, only a few minutes from home. The hours were long, and the work was exhausting. He would leave early, spend the morning on his feet, and return home worn down, sometimes barely saying a word before disappearing into his room. I admired his determination, even when I worried about him. There were moments when I wished he would slow down. He was young. He should have been thinking about friends, adventures, and all the ordinary things people his age took for granted. Instead, he carried himself like someone who had already decided that life was something to endure rather than enjoy. Then came the hottest summer I could remember. The heat settled over everything like a blanket. By morning, the walls of the house already seemed warm. By afternoon, even the trees outside looked tired. The air was so heavy that breathing felt like work. That morning, Matthew left for work as usual. I stood near the doorway and watched him disappear down the path before closing the door behind him. Almost immediately, the house became strangely quiet. Too quiet. Leo had already gone to his shift, which meant I had several hours alone with my thoughts. I wandered toward the window and watched the sunlight spread across the yard. The brightness should have made the morning feel peaceful, but instead, I felt an uneasiness I couldn't explain. For weeks, I had been thinking about how distant everyone seemed. We lived under the same roof, ate in the same kitchen, passed each other in the hallways, and yet somehow, we were becoming strangers. I missed the days when Leo would sit with me and talk about nothing for an hour. I missed hearing Matthew laugh from the other room. I missed feeling as though our home was full of life. Lately, it felt like everyone was simply passing through. Then I heard the front door. I turned. Leo stepped inside, looking completely exhausted. His hair was damp with sweat, his shirt clinging to his back, and his face was red from the heat. He gave me the same small smile he had given me since he was a boy. "Mum, it's brutal outside." He placed a little bag of snacks on the kitchen counter before opening the refrigerator and pulling out a bottle of water. I watched him drink almost half of it without stopping. "You need to sit down," I told him. He laughed quietly and dropped into the old wooden chair at the kitchen table. For a few minutes, neither of us said anything. The ceiling fan turned lazily overhead. Somewhere beneath us, one of the old floorboards creaked. Water gathered on the outside of Leo's bottle and dripped onto the table. Those ordinary sounds should have comforted me. Instead, something about the silence felt wrong. Leo wasn't usually this quiet. I studied his face while he stared down at the table. He looked exhausted, but there was something else there too. Something distant in his expression that I couldn't quite understand. "Everything okay?" I finally asked. He looked up. For just a second, his expression changed. Then he smiled. "Yeah, Mum. Just tired." I wanted to believe him. Maybe I did believe him. At least, I wanted to. The heat continued pressing against the windows, and eventually I decided to take a shower. I told Leo I'd be back in a few minutes, and started down the hallway. That was when I heard it. Water. Running water. I stopped. The sound seemed to be coming from the bathroom. I frowned. I was certain no one had been in there when I left the kitchen. I took another step. The bathroom door was slightly open. A narrow strip of light stretched across the hallway floor. For some reason, I couldn't move. There was nothing unusual about an open bathroom door. Nothing frightening about hearing water running. And yet every instinct inside me was telling me to stop. I reached the doorway and slowly pushed it wider. What I saw made the breath catch in my throat. I stood there, completely frozen, trying to understand what I was looking at. Because in that single moment, the ordinary morning I thought I was living through suddenly felt like the beginning of something I would never be able to forget. There, standing beneath the running shower, was Leo. But what caught my attention wasn't him. It was the small black bag sitting on the bathroom counter. For a moment, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I noticed the envelopes scattered beside it. My name was written across one of them. My heart stopped. Why would Leo have something addressed to me? I should have turned away immediately. Instead, I stood frozen, staring at the evidence of something I couldn't explain. Leo hadn't noticed me. He was completely absorbed in the shower, unaware that I had discovered something he clearly hadn't intended me to see. Then my foot struck the mop. It crashed against the floor. Leo turned toward the sound. Panic surged through me. I spun around and hurried back toward the hallway, my thoughts racing faster than I could control. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. What had I just found? The house, which had always been my place of comfort, suddenly felt unfamiliar. That afternoon, when Leo came downstairs, I tried to behave normally. I asked him whether he wanted something to eat. He said no. Neither of us mentioned the bathroom. But something had changed. Every glance felt deliberate. Every silence seemed to contain a question neither of us was ready to ask. My name is Serena. I'm 38 years old. Looking back, I think I had spent years convincing myself that everything in my life was fine, simply because it looked fine from the outside. Matthew was successful. He worked hard and provided everything our family needed. I understood why he was rarely home. I understood the business trips, the late meetings, the hurried dinners. What I didn't understand was how lonely a marriage could feel when the person beside you was always somewhere else. Even when Matthew was sitting across from me, his mind seemed to be in another room. Leo was different. He had always been fiercely independent. He didn't want advice, money, or anyone telling him how to live. Watching him struggle to build his own life made me proud. But now I couldn't stop thinking about that envelope. Why had he been hiding it? And why was my name on it? I returned to the living room and sat down, but I couldn't relax. My mind kept replaying the moment I'd seen the bag. Then I heard the shower stop. A few minutes later, Leo walked into the hallway. "Mum, did you hear something fall?" His voice was completely casual. I looked at him. For one terrifying second, I wondered whether he knew. "The mop," I said quickly. "It fell over." Leo studied me. Then he nodded. "Okay." He walked toward his room. I waited until his door closed before finally breathing again. But the relief didn't last. The next morning, Matthew told me he had to leave town for an entire week. He kissed me quickly, reminded me not to worry, and walked out the front door. The lock clicked behind him. Suddenly, the house seemed enormous. It was just me and Leo. That afternoon, he suggested that we take a short trip together. I turned him down, pretending I had too much to do. He smiled, but I noticed the disappointment in his face. Later, we sat together in the living room and talked about the past. For a little while, things felt normal again. I asked him whether he had thought about dating. He laughed. "Maybe someday. Right now, I just want to get my life figured out." I smiled. But my mind wasn't on dating. It was on the envelope. That evening, Leo suddenly became serious. He looked directly at me. "Mum," he said quietly, "did you go into the bathroom yesterday?" My heart dropped. I couldn't answer. He leaned back and watched my face. "I knew you saw something." The room seemed to shrink around me. "What are you talking about?" Leo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table. I recognized my name before I even touched it. My hands began to shake. "What is this?" Leo looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "That's what I've been trying to figure out." I unfolded the paper. The first line made my blood run cold. It was a message addressed to me, and beneath it was a date from 12 years earlier, a date I remembered for only one reason. It was the day Leo disappeared from my life for 3 terrifying hours when he was a child. I looked up at him. "Where did you get this?" His expression hardened. "I found it in Dad's office." My stomach tightened. Matthew. For the first time, I wondered whether the secret I'd been afraid Leo was hiding had nothing to do with Leo at all. Maybe the real secret had been inside our family for years. And maybe Matthew had been hiding it from both of us, and Al. I couldn't bring myself to look away. Leo stood across from me, waiting for an answer I didn't know how to give. Every instinct told me that something was terribly wrong. Not because of what I had imagined, but because of the secret that had suddenly entered our home and changed the way I saw everything. "Leo," I whispered, "please tell me what's going on." He lowered his eyes. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he took a step backward. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said. My stomach tightened. "Find out what?" He glanced toward the hallway, as though he was afraid someone might be listening. "About Dad." The words barely registered. "Matthew?" Leo nodded. "I found something in his office." He reached into his pocket and pulled out another folded document. I stared at it without touching it. "What is it?" "A letter." My hands began to tremble. "What kind of letter?" "One that explains why he left home so often when I was younger." I swallowed hard. "Leo, you're scaring me." I was scared too. His voice cracked slightly. Then he placed the paper on the table between us. "I thought you deserved to know." I looked down at the envelope. My name was written across the front. Seeing it made something inside me collapse. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "Because I didn't know whether it was true." He paused. "And because I was afraid of what it would do to you." Tears filled my eyes. "I'm your mother. You should have come to me." I wanted to. His expression softened. "But every time I tried, I remembered how happy you seemed when Dad was around." That sentence hurt more than anything else. Because I realized then that Leo had been protecting me from a truth I had never even suspected existed. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated 12 years earlier. I read the first few lines. Then I stopped. My breathing became shallow. There was a name in that letter I hadn't heard in years. A name connected to the darkest period of our marriage. A name I had believed belonged entirely to the past. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "Dad's locked drawer." I looked at Leo. "Does Matthew know you have it?" He shook his head. "No." A terrible silence settled between us. For years, I had blamed loneliness for the emptiness inside our home. I had blamed Matthew's work, his long hours, his constant absence. But now I wondered if I had misunderstood everything. Maybe loneliness hadn't been the problem. Maybe it had been the warning. Leo stood up. "I should leave you alone." "No." The word came out before I could stop it. He turned. "Please stay." He sat back down. I folded the letter carefully, my hands still shaking. "I don't know what this means yet," I said. "I know. And I don't know whether I can believe everything written here." "I know that too." I looked at my son. For the first time in days, the confusion in my mind began to clear. Whatever happened next, I couldn't allow fear to destroy the bond between us. Leo was my son, and I was his mother. That was the one truth I refused to lose. A few days later, Matthew finally returned from his business trip. He walked through the front door carrying his suitcase, smiling as though nothing in the world had changed. He kissed my cheek. "Did you miss me?" I stared at him. Yes, I said quietly. But I didn't tell him what I had discovered. Not yet. Because there was something he didn't know. Leo had kept the original letter. And before Matthew came home, my son had made a copy. The secret was no longer buried. And sooner or later, Matthew was going to realize that we knew. But something had already broken inside our family. Not because of a single argument, but because years of silence had finally begun to crack. I had spent so long believing that keeping everyone together meant keeping certain truths buried. Now I understood how dangerous that could be. I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. The letter was real. The questions were real. And sooner or later, Matthew would have to answer them. The truth had to come out. I just didn't know what it would cost us when it did. How could I confront my husband about something that had been hidden for more than a decade? How could I tell him that Leo had found the evidence he thought he had buried forever? One evening, I asked Leo to come outside with me. The sun was disappearing behind the trees, stretching long shadows across the yard. Everything looked peaceful, almost painfully so. Leo stepped onto the porch and looked at me cautiously. He already knew this conversation couldn't be avoided anymore. For several seconds, I couldn't find the words. Finally, I looked at him and said, "We can't keep carrying this secret alone, Leo. I love you, and I will always be your mother, but we can't allow Dad's secrets to destroy the relationship we have. Whatever happens next, we have to face it honestly." Leo remained silent. His expression was filled with sadness, but there was also something I hadn't seen in him for a long time. Relief. "I know, Mom," he finally whispered. "I just didn't know what else to do." He looked down at the porch steps. "I was afraid you'd blame me for finding it." "I could never blame you for discovering the truth," I told him. "But we have to be careful about what we do with it." Leo nodded slowly. "Then what happens now?" I took a deep breath. "Now we stop hiding. We talk to Dad, and whatever the consequences are, we face them together." 4. He didn't answer immediately. Then he gave a small nod. For the first time, I felt that we weren't standing on opposite sides of a secret anymore. The closeness in our family had changed, but perhaps change didn't always mean destruction. Sometimes the truth had to hurt before anything could begin to heal. Over the following weeks, Leo began preparing to move into his own place. It wasn't an angry departure. It was simply time for him to build his own life while we worked through everything that had happened. We still talked, although our conversations were different, more honest, more careful. There were no more convenient lies or forced smiles. I spent countless nights thinking about the choices that had brought us here. I realized that silence can look like peace from the outside, while quietly destroying a family from within. Eventually, Matthew and I had the conversation we'd both been avoiding. He couldn't deny the letter forever. Some truths survive years of hiding. I still loved my husband, but I finally understood that love doesn't mean accepting every secret or sacrificing your peace to preserve appearances. Sometimes loving your family means having the courage to confront what everyone else wants to ignore. I will never forget what happened in those weeks, but I no longer see the past only as something to regret. I see it as the moment I finally learned that truth can break a family apart, but sometimes it is also the only thing that gives people a chance to rebuild.